The 90s, 2000s were a great time for two kinds of movies. Stylish updates of classic literature like Shakespeare, Jane Austen, etc. Kenneth Branagh went from great to good to passable. And it was also a great time for Chinese films, frequently by Zhang Yimou and Wong Kar-wai. So why not marry the two? The Banquet, 2006, is a Kung Fu Hamlet. So who's with me? Not the Chinese public, apparently. The Chinese public was pretty tepid about this movie. It wasn't proper, I have been told, for Chinese cinema to make unhistorical plots out of Western culture. Not that that bothered China, that also in 2006, Zhang Yimou made the wildly fictionalized Curse of the Golden Flower, starring Chow Yun-fat, Gong Li, and Jay Chou, which claimed to be about the later Shu dynasty, but kind of takes liberties with the story of the founding of the beloved Tang dynasty several hundred years earlier. But, The Banquet, somehow that was stepping over a line. Not a line for me. I mean, come on, Kung Fu Hamlet. So, to start with, I'm going to refer to these characters by their Shakespearean names, because let's be honest, those are the names that we know. A prince returns home to a court where something has gone rotten. He stages a play to imitate his father's murder, which outs his uncle's stepfather as the murderer. His ex is miserable, her brother wants a military coup, his stepfather is deeply conflicted, etc., and it all ends in a Shakespearean shish kebab. I mean, that's Hamlet. And it's also Kung Fu. Hamlet fights first Gertrude and later the players in balletic slow-mo. The set piece where Hamlet's artist colony is massacred by Claudius's men is gorgeous. Laertes saves Hamlet in a scene of snowy bloodshed that's just as ridiculous as it is beautiful, and for a brooding, slow-moving film, this movie has a lot of great action set pieces. There's been a lot of versions of Hamlet over the years. Several are brilliant. My favorites include Kevin Kline's Broadway version, and Hamlet and Elsinore with Christopher Plummer. Olivier's is pretty high on most critics' lists, and I do love its expressionistic sets, which are kind of like Caligari's cleaned-up cousin. But you do have to do something to make Hamlet unique. Recently, they've tried to tell this from Ophelia's point of view, and of course Tom Stoppard did a tour de force in retelling Hamlet as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's story, which was arguably done just as well as the Mackenzie brothers version in The Great White North. But Feng Xiaogang dives into the deep end with a character that's most open to interpretation, Hamlet's mother, Gertrude. The original play is chock full of everything, but you could summarize it by saying that Hamlet is kind of obsessed with not being as great as his own father, and he resents his uncle, who he sees as inferior in every way, for usurping both the throne and his mother's bed. Now, to diffuse some of the icky Freudian stuff, Feng Xiaogang makes Gertrude Hamlet's stepmother, and 4 years younger than the prince. But the bulk of the movie is really wrestling with what it means to be Gertrude, a sexual MacGuffin at the center of the world's most famous play. Most versions treat Gertrude as exactly that, the sexual MacGuffin. Glenn Close played her as a dumb cheerleader, Diane Verona as a boozy trophy wife, Julie Christie as a woman seduced. Zhang Ziyi is none of the above. She is a Machiavellian puppeteer with frail motives but nerves of iron. She's passionate about the crown prince. Hamlet Sr. is barely even referenced. I mean, this is Gertrude's show, so we don't get the prince's obsession with his dead father. Gertrude is far more interested in Hamlet and her own survival. The dead king, like Claudius, was just a rung on her ladder to the top. Claudius is pathetically smitten by her, and we see Gertrude slowly selling herself to him to keep Hamlet safe. First her body,
叔叔能不能放过太子？
嫂嫂，能不能松手？
and then her soul.
太残酷。据说这棍刑是裴红为先帝所创。
能因我而死。
Ge You, who's maybe most famous as the hapless hero of To Live, plays Claudius as a man who is deeply in love. He's treacherous, he's lecherous, he is as sexy as Robert Shaw, but he's as recklessly self-destructive as Patrick Stewart. But, if you're going to make the tragedy of Gertrude, Queen of Denmark, you've got some work to do. Shakespeare's comedies are delightful celebrations of women unleashed. Your Beatrice, Rosalind, Viola, Portia, they may duck behind male masks in order to fulfill their full potential, but given the chance, they shine.
I don't like novels that end happily. They depress me so much.
The good ended happily and the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means.
The tragedies paint a bleaker picture. Juliet and Cleopatra are both punished for their willful sexy behavior with eventual suicides. Cordelia, Imogen, Cressida, Ophelia, they're all blown about like leaves in the wind. Gertrude could be either, but Feng Xiaogang seems to take a page from Chinese history, where figures like the Empress Wu Zetian or the consort Yang Guifei were lauded for their beauty and then blamed for the downfall of the empire. The only thing worse than being beautiful and female in a history book is to be beautiful, female, and successful. It doesn't matter what Gertrude does. She could bear the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or she could take up arms against them, which in the Banquet she does. By opposing them, she ends her life. But not before she stabs Laertes in the throat and watches Claudius commit suicide. I mean, who doesn't have their little pleasures in life? Hamlet and Claudius are both introduced while wearing masks. Hamlet's drama troupe is slaughtered by masked stormtroopers who assume that any of these hippies living in this place might be Hamlet. Claudius greets his wife wearing his brother's armor and mask, and both Claudius and Gertrude complain that the mask doesn't really suit him. Now that mask later bleeds from the eyes, which is one of the few supernatural events in this film. The relationship between performance and performativeness is a major theme for this movie. Shakespeare's Hamlet warns his players against sawing the air or making mouths, and laments that a method actor could give the speech about Priam dying before Hecuba better than Hamlet can act out his own life. Daniel Wu tells his ex-lover, now stepmother, the opposite. Wearing a mask allows his limbs and hands to become the actors, and Gertrude shrugs this off. Masks, she says, are for amateurs. A true person makes their face their own mask. Hamlet and Claudius are rookies. Unlike the men in her life, Gertrude treasures not masks, but cloth. Now, it ought to be the yellow fabric associated with the emperor, but instead she loves red silk, which she says symbolizes passion. Red is the color of good luck in China, and good luck is something that none of these characters rank very high on. But while Gertrude sacrifices herself to keep Hamlet alive, the relations really seem like a shadow of their former selves. They fight, Hamlet has uncomfortable sex with Ophelia, and you get the feeling that Gertrude loves the idea of Hamlet, but the guy himself, he's pretty unpleasant. Hamlet may be a play about revenge and weird family dynamics, but it's very much wrapped up in religious enigmas. Are ghosts real? And if so, does that mean purgatory's real and the Catholics are right? Should I kill my enemy when he's praying or not? The Almighty has fixed his canon against self-slaughter, but hey, everybody's doing it. I suspect that as much as the Chinese reaction to the Banquet was due to historical flim-flam, it also had to do with a vacuum of moral guidance provided by this film. The Chinese Communist Party does like a clean ending, and this has a lot to do with the shift from Hamlet to Gertrude as the narrative focus. We think of Hamlet as a guy on his own, but the fact is, he has a devoted best friend in Horatio, he has a tortured but devoted girlfriend in Ophelia, he has buddies in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Gertrude has who? A husband she distrusts, in this film quite explicitly, and a son who is crazy pants. And she has a country that at best will make her into the Empress Wu Zetian, vilified in the history books, and at worst, they'll string her up. Feng leaves Gertrude's death as open-ended as possible. She may have been killed by the ghost of Hamlet Sr. or Hamlet Jr. or Claudius. She may have been killed by a servant or an agent of Polonius, who, weirdly enough, survives in this version. But the point is, there is no point. It doesn't matter. Somebody was going to kill her. The game goes on. Now, Marxist history in its most cartoonishly simplified form is an upward curve, a Darwinist belief that we're going to get better and we're going to do better. And the Banquet rejects that model. The smart ones, the good ones, the evil ones, the innocent ones, they all end up in the same place.
We fat all creatures else to fat us, and we fat ourselves for worms. Your fat king and your lean beggar is but variable service. 2 dishes, but to 1 table. That's the end.
There's been a lot of Hamlets over the years. Since the early 20th century, Hamlet has been Shakespeare's most favored play, and maybe we can thank 2 world wars and postmodernism for that. In this case, it's about Gertrude being, let's face it, just as important of a soul as her jackass stepson or her creepy second husband. And her attempt to take control of her life in the kingdom, which in this movie works for about 10 minutes before she's dead, it matters. The Banquet was eclipsed in the 2000s amongst an amazing glut of Chinese-language films, and it's been swamped by a noteworthy glut of Hamlet adaptations. Still, in both categories, I would say this film has a claim to greatness. It looks as good as Olivier's, it has the grit of Plummer's, it aches like Kline's. And if adapting someone else's story from another culture is a sin, if we can't learn from each other, well, we would have no Kurosawa, no Sergio Leone, no Tarantino, no Ang Lee, no George Lucas, no Murnau, no Ray Park, no...
I know Kung Fu.
And what kind of siloed, sunless world would that be? But the Banquet pares Hamlet down to a decision that's not normally paid attention to. Gertrude's decision, or rather, Gertrude's lack thereof. She could have said no. Maybe she couldn't, which is even worse. In the play, she's only given one line.
Kill a king. Let's kill a king. King.
Where you realize that she really has no clue what she's done. In the Banquet, there's a beautiful shot where Claudius is closing a door behind him. He reaches back for Gertrude's hand. She gives him her hand, and eventually she takes his life. The Banquet is Hamlet at its most nihilistic. Gertrude, whose life is a cul-de-sac, makes choices. Hamlet, Claudius, Laertes, and Ophelia are all bewildered to see her free will in action. Everybody still dies. Gertrude dies while cradling the scarlet cloth of passion that she's lived for. Imperial yellow or the red of passion? It's just variable service. 2 dishes, but to 1 table. And that is the end.